Okay, let's dive into this. Imagine a transportation system where cars just drive themselves, right? Navigating streets, seamlessly freeing you up from traffic, parking hassles.
Yeah, and picture it framed not just as like a convenience, but as the gateway to an age of abundance.
Exactly. That powerful vision was front and center at Tesla's We Robot event, Burbank, last October. They had these autonomous cars moving through the night. Really cinematic.
And our sources for this deep dive, they make it pretty clear this isn't just about one car. This whole Cybercab idea they showed off, it's presented as like a foundational piece of a much bigger AI-powered ecosystem Tesla's trying to build.
Right. So that's our mission today. We're going to take a deep dive into Tesla's Cybercab initiative. We've pulled together a stack of sources, articles, reports, research, looking at the whole picture.
You know, the tech driving it, the pretty radical business model behind it, the potential impact, and yeah, critically, the enormous hurdles it's still facing.
We're here to help you cut through the noise, basically. Pull out the most important insights from these sources, understand what's really going on, what are the genuinely revolutionary ideas.
And maybe what are the facts that might surprise you? And what are the big fundamental questions that still need answers?
And there's this, like, central tension running through all our sources, isn't there? On one side, you've got this incredibly ambitious economic plan built around a vehicle with just groundbreaking cost targets.
Yeah, like under $30,000 purchase price, operating costs maybe below 20 cents a mile. I mean, that is revolutionary.
It is. But then, as the sources keep hammering home, this whole high-reward vision, it's completely dependent on the success of one core technology, full self-driving.
Right. And right now, according to the data our sources are pointing to, that tech, well, it still has a pretty significant performance gap. It hasn't really delivered on that promise of true, unsupervised autonomy yet.
It's a classic high-reward, very high-risk situation.
Right.
And that's the dichotomy we really want to unpack. So let's start with the vision itself, that We Robot event. It wasn't only the Cybercab, was it?
No, not at all. The event laid out a much bigger vision. Besides the Cybercab, they showed updates on their Optimus humanoid robot and introduced this Robovan concept.
Okay.
Our sources are kind of reading this as Tesla aiming to build a vertically integrated automated economy. Cybercab and Robovan for transport, Optimus maybe doing maintenance, cleaning.
So building the whole infrastructure, not just playing in one part of the market.
That seems to be the interpretation, yeah. They even talked about the fleet's eventual computing power being like, Amazon Web Services style of computing. The ambition level is, well, it's high.
It's striking.
Yeah.
But let's zero in on the Cybercab vehicle itself, because the sources detail a design that is it's truly radical. Purpose-built.
Yeah, radical minimalism, future deco. Those were some terms used.
What really struck me from the sources was how every single choice seems driven by one goal: make the cheapest, most efficient autonomous ride-hailing machine possible.
Absolutely. And nothing screams that louder than just the complete absence of normal car controls.
Yeah, no steering wheel, no pedals.
Yeah.
Not even side mirrors or a rear window.
It's an incredibly bold statement, right? The sources explain removing these isn't just for looks. It directly cuts cost, complexity, weight, and it maximizes the interior space.
It signals they really believe they'll get to level 4 or 5 autonomy, no human backup needed within its zone.
Or at least that's the message they want to send. It's a huge bet on the software.
And the two-seat thing seems odd for a taxi, doesn't it?
Well, this is where the sources highlight some data. Apparently, their internal numbers show something like 82% of vehicle miles are driven with just 1 or 2 people inside.
82%. Wow.
Yeah. So by optimizing for that huge majority, they can make the whole vehicle way smaller, lighter, more aerodynamic.
Which then has knock-on effects for cost, right?
Right. Exactly. Smaller, lighter vehicle means you don't need a giant, expensive battery pack for decent urban range. The sources mention maybe 35 to 50 kilowatt hour. It's tiny compared to consumer EVs.
Right, because for a robotaxi in a set area with charging nearby, you don't need 300 miles of range.
Precisely. And it saves a ton on cost and weight again. And they're targeting efficiency numbers that are just wow.
Like what?
Aiming for around 5.5 to 6.0 miles per kilowatt hour. That's roughly 50% better than a Model 3.
Wow.
Sources attribute it to the lightweight body. It's unpainted polyurethane, the teardrop shape, that narrow rear end, custom wheels and tires. Everything is optimized to cut drag and weight.
And the charging is all wireless, no plugging in.
Inductive charging only, yeah.
Yep.
Which makes sense for a fully autonomous fleet, right? The cars just drive over a pad themselves. Sources mention claims of over 90% efficiency for that and a 19 kilowatt charge rate. Pretty decent.
So what's it like for the passenger inside this minimalist pod?
The idea is a comfortable little lounge, big 20.5-inch touchscreen for controls and info. Those butterfly or gull-wing doors, they're seen as practical for cities, opening up, not out into traffic.
Makes sense.
And then there's the really ambitious concept of automated self-cleaning between rides, which, for a shared vehicle used constantly, you kind of need that.
So when you step back, this unique, purpose-built Cybercab design, it's not just looks, it directly enables that revolutionary economic potential.
It absolutely does. If you look at comparisons like the ones in Table 1.1 in some reports, contrasting the Cybercab spec's low price target, minimal seats for efficiency, small battery against a standard EV or a competitor's modified car, the difference is stark. The design itself is meant to be a competitive advantage for hitting those low-cost numbers.
And just quickly, the Robovan concept that just scales this idea up.
Essentially, yeah. Applies the same autonomous tech stack to a bigger vehicle for mass transit. Think autonomous shuttles or small buses. It just underlines the ambition. They're not just going after ride-hailing, they're looking at disrupting transport at, well, every scale.
Okay, so incredibly optimized vehicle, fascinating business model. But like we said up front, the whole thing balances on the autonomy software.
And this is where our sources really dig into the fundamental challenge. The entire Cybercab vision relies completely on full self-driving working at a level it hasn't reached yet.
And they've taken a very specific, maybe controversial tech path to get there.
The vision-only approach, just cameras and AI. No LiDAR, no radar.
Why do they do that?
Their argument, according to the sources, is cost cameras are cheaper, scalability, you can put cameras on millions of cars easily, and data leveraging their huge fleet for fleet learning.
Billions of miles of real-world data, yeah.
That's the pitch. But the weakness, which multiple sources highlight, is pretty significant. AI has to figure out depth and distance from 2D images. LiDAR gets that directly. Right. So it makes the system potentially more vulnerable in tricky edge cases or bad conditions, heavy rain, sun glare, fog, low light, where cameras just don't perform as well. Competitors use redundant sensors like LiDAR and radar to cover those weaknesses. Tesla's betting purely on software to overcome the physics.
And despite calling it full self-driving, it's currently... Well, it's not, is it?
No, and this is a really crucial point the sources emphasize. FSD today is level 2 driver assist. The driver must pay attention, hands on the wheel, ready to take over immediately.
But a robotaxi, the Cybercab, that needs level 4 or 5. System handles everything in its area.
Exactly, and that's a huge gap to bridge.
And the sources suggest the performance. It hasn't been improving fast enough to bridge that gap anytime soon.
That's a key finding from the data presented. Third-party testing cited suggests FSD performance kind of stalled, maybe even regressed slightly in 2025. Yeah, the big V13 update didn't hit the claimed 5-6x improvement in disengagements. It was closer to 2x. And later updates apparently showed some decline, having critical disengagements every few hundred miles. It's just nowhere near the thousands of miles Waymo reports in its operating areas.
And isn't there a hardware issue too? Like, millions of older Teslas can't even run the latest FSD.
Yes, the sources point that out very clearly. Millions of vehicles with the older Hardware 3 platform. The analysis suggests they will never support unsupervised self-driving.
Wow.
The latest stuff, like V13, needs the newer HW4, so that creates a pretty big credibility gap with customers who bought FSD based on promises of future full autonomy, and potential liability issues, too.
So if FSD on the consumer cars isn't there yet, how does this Austin pilot program fit in? They're planning that for June 2025.
Yeah, the Austin pilot, it feels like a bit of a strategy shift, maybe, or moving the goalposts, as some sources put it. It's pitched as unsupervised, but it's explicitly geofenced, restricted to a specific area. And critically, reports indicate it will likely lean heavily on teleoperation. So remote humans monitoring and stepping in when the cars get stuck.
Which is, well, that's the model Tesla always criticized its competitors for using.
Exactly. And it's really important to understand. A geofenced, tele-assisted pilot is not the grand vision of the Tesla network, with millions of consumer cars driving autonomously everywhere.
Right.
It suggests they might be pursuing two different paths now. General FSD for consumers and this more constrained geofenced fleet model for robotaxis. Success in Austin is good, but it doesn't automatically mean the global network concept works, and splitting focus could slow both down.
So the bottom line from our sources on the tech side is the vision's compelling, but the whole ambitious Cybercab plan is balanced really precariously on solving this incredibly hard software problem. And the data suggests they're still quite far from solving it, facing big performance and credibility issues.
That's the core risk, yeah. The required tech leap is still massive.
Okay, let's pivot to the business model, because this is where Tesla's approach with the Cybercab gets really, truly disruptive. It's not just about selling cars anymore, is it?
No, this is the fundamental pivot from mostly a manufacturer to a high-margin platform and services provider. The Cybercab vehicle is the key to unlock that.
So tell us about this Tesla network model they're planning.
The genius, or potential genius, is the capital light strategy. They might start with some company-owned cars, like in Austin, to get things going. But the big long-term idea is what some sources call the Airbnb model.
Yeah.
Individual owners of FSD-capable Teslas, maybe including people who buy a cheap Cybercab, can just add their car to the network when they aren't using it. The car then goes off, drives autonomously, earns money for the owner through the Tesla app.
So Tesla avoids sinking billions into buying and owning the whole fleet itself.
Exactly. They basically offload the huge capital costs of the vehicles and a lot of the operating burden, charging, cleaning, basic maintenance, insurance onto the individual owners.
Yes.
It's totally different from Waymo, for instance, which owns and runs its entire fleet.
Right.
It makes Tesla's model potentially built for really rapid capital-efficient scaling if the tech works.
And Tesla takes a cut of the ride revenue.
That's the high-margin play. Tesla makes money selling the car, selling or subscribing the FSD software, which is currently, what, $99 a month?
Yeah.
And then they take a service commission on the ride revenue the owner's car generates. Sources are projecting that commission could be like 25, 30%. That recurring revenue could eventually dwarf the profit from just selling the cars.
It sounds strategically brilliant for transferring risk.
It is. Tesla shifts the financial and operational risk onto the consumer owner. Tesla's main risk becomes validating the FSD tech and getting regulatory sign-off. If FSD fails to reach level 45 or they can't get approval, the owner is stuck with a car that can't earn income on the network. It puts a lot of the potential downside on the customer.
And those disruptive economics you touched on earlier, the projected costs are just wild.
Well, the target price under $30,000 makes owning a Cybercab potentially accessible for many people wanting to operate one. But the real kicker is that projected operating cost. Around 20 cents per mile.
How is that even possible?
By getting rid of the driver, the biggest cost in ride-hailing, and by using an ultra-efficient, purpose-built EV.
20 cents a mile. I mean, that's cheaper than running most gas cars, way cheaper than an Uber or Lyft with a driver, maybe even cheaper per mile than taking the bus in some cities.
That's the potential disruption. Sources suggest this could allow a ride price maybe as low as 30 or 40 cents per mile. That makes autonomous travel suddenly the cheapest way to get around in a city for many people.
So it wouldn't just compete with Uber. It could pull people away from buses, their own cars, maybe even walking for longer trips.
It could cannibalize everything, yeah.
Yeah.
And dramatically expand the total market for transportation. The market growth forecasts cited are huge, tens, maybe over $100 billion by the early 2030s.
If this business model actually works, it's an existential threat to existing transport players.
Absolutely. And when you look at the competition, like in Table 3.1 comparisons, you see these very different bets. Tesla, vision only, decentralized, capital light, but unproven tech. Waymo, sensor fusion, centralized, capital intensive, proven in limited areas, already running commercial services.
And then there's the cautionary tale of Cruise.
Yeah, the sources really stress how important the Cruise collapse is. Operations suspended, funding gutted after that bad safety incident and the allegations of covering things up. It just hammers home that success isn't just about the tech. Trust is absolutely critical. One bad incident handled poorly can just kill you in this space, which raises the stakes incredibly high for Tesla, given FSD's history of scrutiny.
So the business model, potentially genius, radically low costs, capital light scaling, huge threat. But, just like the tech, it's a high-risk bet tied directly to FSD actually working safely and reliably and navigating that whole trust issue highlighted by Cruise's failure.
The potential reward is massive, but the path is incredibly challenging, technologically and, frankly, ethically.
Okay, speaking of challenges beyond the tech, let's look at the tangled mess of regulations and public trust.
Right, because even if FSD was perfect tomorrow, the Cybercab faces huge non-technical hurdles here, just as critical as the tech itself.
The U.S. regulatory scene for AVs sounds messy.
Fragmented is the word. There's no single comprehensive federal law for deploying autonomous vehicles. It's more a patchwork of state laws.
But didn't NHTSA, the federal agency, make some moves recently that seem helpful for companies like Tesla?
Yes, in 2025, NHTSA announced a pretty significant deregulatory shift. They streamlined what's called the Part 555 exemption program.
Okay, what's that?
That's how vehicles like the Cybercab, the ones without steering wheels or pedals, get permission to be tested on public roads, even if they don't meet all standard safety rules. The idea is to speed up approvals, make it easier, especially for domestic companies. So it's definitely a tailwind for testing the hardware.
And they eased up on crash reporting, too.
They did tweak the rules, yeah. Giving companies a bit more time to report some severe crashes, simplifying some details, reduces some paperwork burden.
So, sounds like good news for getting Cybercab prototypes out there testing.
For testing, yes. But the sources point out this is kind of a double-edged sword. By making it easier to test cars with no human controls, it puts intense focus and pressure on proving the software is safe. Any incident with the Cybercab prototype is going to be massively visible because the car itself screams driverless. One failure could trigger a huge backlash, just like with Cruise. So the easier hardware testing puts a blazing spotlight on the software safety validation.
And there are still fundamental regulatory questions completely unanswered.
Oh, absolutely. There's still no agreed-upon standard or framework for certifying that AI driving software is safe enough for widespread unsupervised use. How does a regulator actually sign off on that? And liability. Who pays when an autonomous car crashes? It likely shifts to the manufacturer, but that's a huge legal gray area, totally untested in courts for AI systems.
Plus, you still have to deal with all the different state rules to go nationwide.
Right. Some states like Arizona, Texas, they're pretty AV-friendly. Others like California have much tougher requirements, testing miles, permits, oversight. That really slows down a national rollout.
Okay, so regulatory.
Yeah.
Easier testing, maybe, but huge scrutiny and big unsolved problems. What about public trust? The sources sounded pretty grim on that front.
This might honestly be the biggest hurdle. The survey numbers are stark. Something like 93% of people concerned about self-driving cars, 2/3 actively afraid to ride in one. Only about 9% say they fully trust the tech.
Why? What are the main reasons?
Lack of control, mostly, and just a fundamental lack of trust in the technology doing the right thing.
And Tesla's own history doesn't help here, does it?
The sources suggest it definitely contributes. You know, the high-profile autopilot crashes, the fatalities, the ongoing criticism over naming it full self-driving when it isn't. That's damaged public perception of Tesla's tech specifically. One survey, after some recalls found, like 62% weren't confident in it.
And this feeds into a sort of vicious cycle.
Exactly. Tesla needs its public beta fleet driving miles to collect data and improve FSD. But testing an imperfect system on public roads inevitably leads to incidents, accidents, bad headlines.
Which then fuels more public fear and skepticism.
Right. Which makes regulators more cautious, makes the public less willing to accept level 4 or 5 deployment. It's a really tough cycle to break.
And Cruise is the ultimate example of trust just evaporating overnight.
It wasn't just a tech failure, it became a trust failure because of the incident itself and the allegations of trying to hide information. Trust is incredibly hard to build in this space, so easy to lose, and you absolutely need it for people to actually use these things.
So navigating this complex web of rules and overcoming this deep public distrust, it's just as vital as perfecting the tech, maybe even harder. Requires real proof of safety, transparency, over a long time.
Yeah, you need a fundamental shift in how people feel about it, built on seeing it work safely, day in, day out.
Okay, let's zoom out one last time. Look at the bigger picture. If somehow the Cybercab, the Tesla network, if it all does succeed, if this age of abundance arrives, how could it actually change things?
Well, this isn't just about getting a ride differently. A successful, cheap, autonomous network could profoundly reshape our cities, the job market, the environment, everything.
Let's start with cities. The optimistic view sounds pretty nice.
The utopian idea centers on parking. AVs drop you off, then go park themselves somewhere else or get another fare, so you drastically reduce the need for parking lots, garages.
Freeing up huge amounts of land in cities.
Exactly. For parks, housing, wider sidewalks, bike lanes. Maybe even homes don't need garages anymore, leading to more human-focused street designs.
But the sources flag some serious dystopian risks too, right?
Oh yeah, big ones. Like the convenience and low cost could fuel massive urban sprawl. If your commute time becomes productive time, you can work. Relax, and maybe you're willing to live much further out.
And the zombie car problem.
Right, empty cars just circling around to avoid parking fees or constantly repositioning. That, plus the potential for way more trips overall because it's so cheap and easy, could dramatically increase total vehicle miles traveled, or VMT.
Which could actually make traffic worse, even if the AVs themselves drive smoothly.
It's a tricky balance. Yes, AVs might improve flow platooning, smooth driving, better routing, they could increase road capacity. But if the sheer convenience leads to way more total trips, people ditching walking, biking, transit for cheap AV rides, that increased demand could completely overwhelm any efficiency gains.
Okay, what about jobs? That seems like a massive area of disruption.
Huge. Millions of professional driving jobs are directly in the line of fire. Truckers, bus drivers, taxi and ride-hail drivers, delivery folks. One study estimated over 4 million U.S. jobs potentially vulnerable. And it disproportionately hits certain demographics, like men without college degrees.
But new jobs will get created, right? Fleet managers, remote operators.
Yes, definitely. New roles in managing fleets, teleoperation, maintenance, engineering, data analysis will emerge. But the sources really stress the risk of a big skills mismatch. The new jobs need different skills, different training than the ones being lost. Think about ATMs replacing bank tellers. New jobs emerged, but it was a tough transition for the tellers.
And environmentally. Is this a clear win because they're electric?
Surprisingly, it's not clear-cut at all, according to the sources. Yes, potential gains are there. Electrification means no tailpipe emissions, good for air quality and climate, assuming clean electricity. Operational efficiencies could cut energy use per mile. Shared mobility could mean fewer cars overall, reducing manufacturing impacts.
But the big risk loops back to that VMT problem again.
That's the key environmental wildcard. If cheap AVs lead to way more driving longer commutes, more trips, zombie cars that increase VMT could totally swamp the benefits. Even if they're electric, you're straining the grid, increasing overall energy demand and emissions, unless the grid is 100% renewable.
Right.
Plus, manufacturing emissions could rise if cars wear out faster from higher use. And all the onboard computing for autonomy uses significant energy, potentially cutting into the EV efficiency. One study cited suggested the life cycle emissions of autonomous EVs could actually be 8% higher than regular EVs because of these rebound effects from increased VMT.
So, whether we get urban utopia or sprawl, environmental win or loss, it's not baked into the tech itself.
Not at all. The sources are really clear on this. The outcome depends almost entirely on policy choices we make now. Without proactive policies, things like incentivizing shared AV rides over private ones, road pricing for empty miles, integrating AVs with public transit, robust job retraining programs, the negative outcomes are much more likely. You can see this in scenario comparisons, like the unmanaged versus managed outcomes in Table 5.1. Policy is crucial to steer this thing.
It's not just a tech story. It's fundamentally a policy and society story.
Absolutely. Tech is the catalyst, but human choices, policy choices, will decide if this age of abundance actually benefits everyone.
Okay, let's try and bring this all together then. This has been a really deep dive into something incredibly complex, incredibly high stakes.
Yeah, the Cybercab. It's undeniably a bold bet. It's the key piece in Tesla's attempt to shift into being a software and services company built on this potentially brilliant, definitely disruptive capital-light business model.
A model that could really upend the whole transportation sector.
It could. But, and this is the big, but running through all our sources, that entire high-reward vision is currently completely chained to solving the enormous challenge of level 45 full self-driving.
Right.
And that technology, based on the data we've looked at, seems still quite a ways off. And it faces these huge non-tech hurdles to regulation and that massive public trust deficit.
It really feels like a high-reward, high-risk thing with a potentially binary outcome. Either it works and changes everything, or it doesn't quite get there.
It does feel that way. And for anyone wanting to track how this unfolds, the sources point to some really key indicators to keep an eye on.
Okay, what should people be watching?
On the tech side, look for real, verifiable, independent data. Is FSD performance actually reaching Waymo levels, measured in miles per critical disengagement? And crucially, are we seeing actual unsupervised deployment outside of tiny geofences without constant remote human help?
What about the regulatory front?
Watch for level 4 commercial deployment approval from major regulators, especially tough ones like California. And any movement on clarifying AV crash liability, federally or state level.
Business and market side.
Keep an eye out for the actual launch of the Tesla network for paying customers. Is it happening? Is there data on ride volume, revenue per car? Are owners actually making money? And of course, watch for volume production of the Cybercab itself. And does it really hit that sub $30 K price?
And maybe the toughest one to measure, public perception.
Yeah, look for independent survey data. Is there a sustained positive shift in public trust over time? That would have to be built on a long track record of demonstrably safe operation, minimal bad news.
Looking at those indicators really highlights the strategic implications for everyone involved.
Yeah, for investors, this is an AI bet now, not just EVs. Sources suggest maybe discounting the company's timelines, focusing on these external proof points. For competitors, that potential sub 20-cent mile cost is an existential threat. They need to accelerate their AV plans fast.
And for policymakers.
The message is loud and clear. Plan now. Policy, not just tech, will shape the outcome. Focus on pricing, zoning, transit integration, job programs. Proactively guide this, don't just react.
Ultimately, this stuff matters to you, the listener.
It really does. If this works, it could fundamentally change how you live, work, move around your city. It impacts traffic, parking, jobs, the environment, everything. The choices being made right now by companies, regulators, and, the public will shape that future for generations.
And that kind of leaves us with this final thought to chew on. Given the huge potential, this revolutionary age of abundance they talk about, but also the really significant risks we've discussed, sprawl, job losses, maybe even negative environmental impacts if it's not managed right. How do we make sure that if this future comes, it actually benefits everyone? How do we make sure it improves our cities broadly and doesn't just solve traffic for some while creating bigger problems for others? What role does policy have to play in guiding this?
A massive one, absolutely critical.